Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I dive into today's review, I do want to mention if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG. And all you need to do is visit gaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a small portion of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal or become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. Today, I'll be sharing my review of the Cypher System Rulebook from Monte Cook Games. This is written by Monte Cook, Bruce R. Cordell, and Sean K. Reynolds, with Shauna Germain and Robert J. Schwalb. This 448-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $69.99. If you want to grab the PDF, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $22.99. I have to say, I really appreciate the pricing of the PDFs from Monte Cook Games. Most publishers out there will simply take the MSRP of the physical release, just cut it in half and say, there you go, that's the price of the PDF. Monte Cook Games, it's usually about a third, maybe a little bit more of the MSRP. So I know there are a lot of gamers out there who appreciate that sort of pricing. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got the Cypher System Rulebook from Monte Cook Games. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Monte Cook Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel of what you're going to find inside. This is also not going to be a deep dive into the mechanics of Cypher System. Mechanically, pretty easy to wrap your head around for most people, players and game masters out there. There is some crunch involved. I am not going to get into all of the minor details about that, but I am going to give you an overview of Cypher System. And then some of you out there might be wondering, Jeff, why are you sharing a review of the rule book now? Monte Cook Games just wrapped up a crowdfunding project to bring a new edition, or at least a new revised version of Cypher System called Cypher. Why talk about this when that's on the horizon? And I will discuss that a little bit later in this review. First thing we'll do is take a look at the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life, so let's give credit where credit is due. If you're not familiar with the Cypher System, it is a genre agnostic role-playing game. So that means any sort of setting, any sort of focus you'd like to bring to your table, you can pull that off with Cypher System, be it fantasy, science fiction, modern horror, crime noir, romance even. All of that is possible with Cypher System. You might be familiar with some of the role-playing games that Cypher System powers, such as Numenera, the Old Gods of Appalachia, the Magnus Archives. Of course, those games are self-contained, so those core rule books contain all of the rules needed to play. You don't need this rule book in order to utilize those. Now, there are a bunch of really cool genre books that Monte Cook Games has released. In fact, I've shared first looks at some very recently, including High Noon at Midnight and Neon Rain. If you want to use those at the game table, you do require the rule book to do so. So let's talk about characters here. The way Cypher System is broken down is you will have a type, a descriptor, and a focus. So the type is essentially your archetype, and we have four. We have the warrior, the adept, the speaker, and the explorer. And you would be amazed, just about any sort of character you can think of is going to fall within those very broad types. And then the type you choose is also going to provide you options as far as abilities that your character will have. So right off the bat, just having your type is going to give you an idea of the sort of character you're going to be playing. I have to say, as far as Cypher System goes, it's one of the best role-playing games I've encountered that players can custom craft the exact sort of character they want to play. Now, of course, there's some abstraction involved here, but you've got a lot of wiggle room, and I thought that is very, very cool. So you'll have your type, then you're going to have a descriptor, and there are 50 descriptors included in this rule book. And I'll give you an example of a character. You might have a character who is an adept, who is clever, and builds robots. So the adept is the type. Then you also have clever, so that's your descriptor, and then builds robots, that is your focus, or the plural, in this case, foci. There are 90 foci included. Then we've got a bunch of abilities on top of that. So we've got a great way for the players to custom craft the sort of character they want at the game table. And I'll give you an example here. We have needs no weapon. Now this is a focus. Powerful punches, kicks, elbows, knees, and full body movements are all the weapons you need. Okay, so right there, that's making you think of certain kind of characters, sort of a modern setting. You're looking at, oh, okay, so it's a martial artist. Oh, I'm thinking of fantasy. Oh, okay, so it's a monk. And then depending on the tier of the character, you're going to have different abilities available to that character. Really nicely done. And of course, just because you have a specific type, as the character advances, you can also experiment with things that are maybe focuses of other types out there. So you can kind of branch out into different things. As far as the tiers for player characters, they do run from 1 to 6. It's important to keep in mind, we're not talking about levels here. So a tier 1 is a competent character. They can walk and chew gum at the same time, whereas a tier 6 character is not some godlike being by any stretch either. As far as creating your characters, we do have 3 attributes, which are really mainly just pools of points that the player uses to do different things. So some abilities will have a point cost that needs to be spent from these pools. And we have might, speed, and intellect. These pools will also be our health for your player characters. That is something that I do know is changing with Cypher, that will no longer have the pool points also be, in essence, your hit points that you lose. So in combat, currently with Cypher System, unless the sort of damage you're taking is a specific kind of damage, so you might have intellect damage, you might have speed damage, normally you'll start by deducting points from your might. And then once that runs out, you start deducting from speed. Once that runs out, you deduct from intellect. And if you hit 0 on all your pools, then, well, your character has now bought the farm. That is going to change. And I do understand this is something that's just going to take seconds to change on the fly. So if you are utilizing something that was released for a Cypher System, but you're going to be using Cypher, there's going to be an easy calculation to come up with the health points. Because interestingly enough, the NPCs, creatures, monsters, so forth, they have a health pool. You're not going from their various different attribute pools. So simple enough. I know that's one of the major changes that's coming with Cypher. To my knowledge, it's not like a major revamp that's taking place. And you also have to keep in mind, Cypher is still at least a year away. That's without any unforeseen circumstances popping up that would push it further back. So, as far as me sharing a review of this rule book right now, even though Monte Cook Games just finished up that crowdfunding run, this is still very much applicable. Plus, the changes that are going to be made in Cypher are not massive changes. It's not as if it's suddenly, wow, this is a new edition, like we see new editions of other games that radically change those games mechanically. These things are still going to stay the same. So we are going to have pools of points. These pools of points are not like we see attribute ranges with a lot of role-playing games where it's 3 to 18, where 3 is pretty pathetic. 18 is pretty much the highest on the human scale or close to the highest. These pools are used to power your character. So we'll have pools of points. Let's say our character has 13 points in all of their pools. So they have 13 points of might, 13 points of speed, 13 points of intellect. But their character is a warrior. So they're going to focus more on might-related things. So what they'll end up having is what's known as an edge. So one of the things that the players utilize these points for is to spend points on effort. As far as the mechanics of the game, we are looking at difficulty tiers of 1 to 10. And like many role-playing games, players are going to be rolling a 20-sided die. They're looking to meet or exceed a target number. Now, that target number is simply the difficulty tier times 3. Now, of course, some quick math will tell you a difficulty 7 or higher is going to be impossible because you can't roll 21 or higher on a 20-sided die. But there are different ways to bring the difficulty tier down. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about you're spending effort to bring the target number down. No, you're bringing the difficulty tier down. So spending points to utilize effort brings down the tier by 1. Now, as you go up in character tiers, you'll be able to spend more points. So you might be able to spend 2 effort to bring it down 2 tiers. But early on, you do have limitations to how much you can bring down the difficulty tier of whatever you're looking to achieve. So if you spend points on effort, which is normally 3 points from your pool based on what you're looking to achieve. So if it was might related, you're spending it from your might pool. If it's speed or agility related, then you're looking at spending it, obviously enough, from the speed pool, and so forth with intellect. So spending the 3 points out of your pool is going to bring that difficulty down. So you could take a difficulty 7, bring it down to a 6, and then suddenly you now have 18 or higher as far as the target number you need to roll. Now, with most 20-sided die-driven role-playing games, the higher you roll, the better. So if you roll a 19 and you're in the middle of trying to achieve a task, you're overcoming a challenge, what have you, we're not talking about combat. If you roll a 19, then you do it a bit better than just a normal success. You get a little bit of a bump. If you roll a 20, well, then that's kind of a major success. You've done something exceptionally well. Maybe you get a little bonus out of that. If you roll a 1, that is going to allow for what's known as a game master intrusion. And what it is, it allows the game master to make life a little bit more difficult for the player characters, or the player character in particular who rolled that 1. So that is just a really nice narrative mechanic tossed into the game because it's important for you to know the game master does not roll dice. If the player characters are being attacked, they're going to roll the dice for their enemies attacking them. The players roll all of the dice. Now, does that mean that the game master can't roll dice to determine, something randomly going on? Like, oh, okay, so how did the bad guys approach this? Of course, they can obviously do that. But anything that's directly going to have any effect on the players are going to roll the dice. I like that. I think that's pretty cool. It really takes a lot of things out of the hands of the game master and puts the onus on the players. So the players can't sit there and complain that the game master got a lucky roll because the game master's not rolling those dice. So I dig that quite a bit. Now, combat, we do have some tactical aspects. There is a little bit of crunch involved with combat in the Cypher system. Now, one thing some people may not like is the fact that weapons all do the same sort of damage depending on the type. So if it's a light weapon, you hit, it does 2 points. If it's a medium weapon, you hit, it does 4. Heavy weapon does 6. Some people might not care for that just straight out. Oh, it's a light weapon. Okay, a dagger. Well, a dagger does the same amount of damage as a rapier, as being hit on the head with a club. Okay, I get it. Now, remember, I talked about rolling high die rolls. There are going to be some ways that you can do more damage than just the standard. So if the player rolls a 17 and they're successful, that will add an additional point of damage. They roll an 18, and once again, they must be successful on these rolls. They'll do 2 additional points, and 19 is 3 additional points or something minor that is going to be helpful for the player in combat. And of course, if they roll a 20, it's 4 additional points of damage or something major that benefits the player or players in combat. Cypher System is a narrative game. This is not a game that's about going out and fighting monsters and gathering loot. That is not how players gain experience. It's important to keep in mind that the players earn experience by discovery and exploration, as well as when the game master makes an intrusion. So during gameplay, players can spend an experience point to create a player intrusion. It's something that helps the players out. It's beneficial to the players. In essence, it's changing what's going on in the game world. Now, it can't be something major, but it's a way to help put some of the power of the narration of what's going on in the story into the player's hands. Now, the game master will also get a GM intrusion. And what they'll do is say that they're using a GM intrusion and they're going to introduce something into the experience, into the adventure, the session, that's going to make life more difficult for the player characters. Rather than a game master rolling randomly to see when reinforcements might appear in a pitched battle that's going on with the player characters, the game master can simply say, okay, game master intrusion. Suddenly, 3 more mooks come bursting through the door. Now, when they do that, they give the player that it's going to affect an experience point, and then they give them an extra experience point for them to give to another player of their choice. It has to be somebody who's done something. It can't just be like, oh, well, I really like Joe, so I'm going to give Joe an experience point. Now, it's got to be another player who's maybe come up with a cool idea, or maybe they did something that really helped out as far as the adventure. Maybe they were the character that dealt the killing blow to the monster that you were having a hard time with, whatever. But the additional experience point has to be given to another player. Now, players can decide, we're not going to allow you to do that, evil game master. Now, they can refuse the intrusion, but it will cost them an experience point. I really like the whole concept of the experience points. Now, you're not going to have players with hundreds of experience points because they can use experience points to re-roll a die. And of course, they can use an experience point to say no to the GM intrusion. Now, when the player rolls a 1 on a 20-sided die, there is a GM intrusion, but the players do not get experience for that. Now, as far as the character advancement, players can spend experience points to do different things. So they can spend 4 experience points to improve their training in something. They can use experience points to gain a new ability. They can spend experience points to increase the number of points that they've got in their pools. So quite a few different things. And then once a player has increased 4 different things, then they move to the next tier. Pretty simple right there as well. This really allows the players to advance their character in whatever ways they want. We also have some sections here about different genres. There are 9 different genres which are tackled. We don't get into a ton of depth about each, but you get a pretty good idea of, as a game master, how you would approach using Cypher System for those sorts of genres. We even have romance in here, historical. And one of the aspects of the historical genre I like, there's discussion about not necessarily having to be historical down to the exact dates and everything has to fall into line as far as what happens. It's making something feel historical, something I'm very familiar with running 1920s and 1930s Call of Cthulhu adventures. I never focused on, well, this is the exact thing that happens on this date, but focus on what is the feel of that time. We have a good-sized bestiary here, a wide variety of different NPCs and creatures and such for all different genres, science fiction, fantasy, modern. We even have some Lovecraftian creatures, such as the Migo. One of my favorite parts of this book is the Game Master section. And I have got to say, this contains some of the most useful, coolest information aimed at game masters running interesting games, getting their players to really buy into a setting or campaign and such. I gotta say, some of the absolute best game mastering advice I have ever seen in a core rule book for a role-playing game. I do want to mention the ciphers because this is the name of the game here, right? It's Cypher System. The new version coming out is going to simply be called Cypher. I shared my review of the Cypher System starter set, and I mentioned I was still a little bit confused about ciphers because I come from a tradition where running a role-playing game, your player characters find different things and they make them more powerful. It helps advance the story and so on and so forth, where ciphers are just one-shot things. A cipher is not a magical sword. A cipher would be a spell scroll or a healing potion, as an example. Those would be manifest ciphers. Those would be physical items. And depending on the genre, it's going to really steer you towards different kinds of ciphers. We've got all these various ciphers here, such as Attractor, Burst of Speed, Chemical Factory, Instant Servant. I mean, we've got loads and loads of ciphers. And then, of course, the other role-playing games, the other genre books, all have more ciphers too. Some of them are subtle. So if you are running a more modern sort of setting for a Cypher system, you would probably aim towards more subtle ciphers. So a burst of inspiration, or being able to know a secret, or knowing the answer to a question. Those would be subtle ciphers. Whereas manifest ciphers would be more physical items. You probably wouldn't see those as much in a modern setting. You might see that more in science fiction or fantasy or more fantastical settings. So you might have a cipher that allows a player character to teleport from one location to another location. That's going to be a manifest cipher. It takes a little getting used to. And I think that is probably the trickiest thing for a game master, rewarding players with ciphers, because there is a limitation to the number of ciphers that a player character can have. But then ciphers are also made to be used. So they're given away to be spent, to be used. You can modify different things on the fly with ciphers. So the ciphers are really powerful, having a bigger impact to how the stories play out, because using a cipher at the right time could be critical to the success or failure of the adventure that the player characters have embarked on. I gotta say, reading through the section about ciphers really did help clear things up with subtle, manifest, as well as fantastical ciphers too. So I like that. This is the GM section I was talking about. That is excellent. It is really, really well done. We do get a little bit of an example of a game. Then into the index, we've got our character sheets. One thing we do not have is an introductory adventure. I know it would probably be fairly difficult to come up with an introductory adventure which would be appealing to everyone picking up this book, but I still would have liked to have gotten an idea of how an adventure is presented in this rule book for Cypher System. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. If you saw my review of the Cypher System starter set, you know I liked it, but I also still had questions about ciphers, especially how you award them to the players, how you make sure the ciphers are going to be applicable to those player characters. Thankfully, this rule book has answered the vast majority of questions that I had. And I got to say, it mainly stems from my experience over the decades of being a game master. And most games, the player characters will find treasure, they'll earn gear, they learn spells, they find magical grimoires, and so on and so forth. And that really drives their progression and their powering up. Whereas Cypher System, the ciphers are just one and done. They're one-use items. And it could be a burst of inspiration. It could be the player character knows a secret. Or it could be a device that teleports someone from one end of the galaxy to the other. Regardless, they are still one and done. And as I mentioned, I think the trickiest part of it in my mind was, how do you go about rewarding your players with these ciphers? And I'll be honest, I think I need to run Cypher System a few times, and then it would start to come pretty naturally to me. Mechanically, this is a pretty easy game for players to understand. Now, I do want to point out, there are some complexities here that might surprise people who see that Cypher System takes a narrative approach. So this has some crunch. Now, I wouldn't say that this is a rules-heavy game by any stretch of the imagination, but there are certain aspects to the mechanics of Cypher System that might be a little trickier for people to remember. So keep that in mind. I think the heavier lifting is on the GM side. I think as a player should be pretty easy, especially if the players are used to Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or any D20 driven game. There is tons of content in this book. You got to keep in mind, this is over 440 pages. About 40 pages are the rules. The rest is all extra goodness. And like I said, there's tons here. There are 50 descriptors. There are 90 foci. There are tons and tons of abilities. We've got 9 different genres for game masters to dip their toes into. Now, of course, they aren't all encompassing, but they will give a game master a really good idea of how to utilize Cypher System for those kind of settings. We've got a pretty expansive bestiary. I was very surprised to see that. And we've got a lot of NPCs, creatures, and monsters from a wide variety of genres as well. My absolute favorite thing about the book is the Game Master advice. I think there are some fantastic items in here as far as becoming a better game master, how to keep your players involved, how to make sure everybody at the game table has a blast. I'll be very honest. I think this is some of the best game mastering advice I have ever seen in my lifetime of gaming, not just reviewing role-playing games. And a great amount of the content is applicable to other role-playing games, not just those powered by the Cypher system. I know some folks out there are wondering, geez, Jeff, why are you reviewing this rulebook now? Monte Cook Games just finished up that crowdfunding project for Cypher. As I mentioned, not a ton is changing with Cypher compared to Cypher System. Yes, we're going to have a health pool. We are no longer going to see the player characters lose points from their attribute pools when they take damage. There are some other tweaks as well, but it's not like Cypher is going to be a huge revamp of Cypher System, not by any stretch of the imagination. And you're still looking at that book being at least a year away. And there's so much in this rule book which will still be 100% applicable when Cypher comes out. They just had a new print run of this rule book. So it's not as if it's sort of like, well, you know, Monte Cook's still got like 50 copies of the book they're trying to get rid of. No, not at all. And of course, if you want to utilize any of the genre books that have come out and you don't want to have to wait until Cypher arrives on the scene, then by all means, you're going to want to pick up this rule book. I got to say, I am so impressed. This is a fantastic book. Do I have some quibbles? Yes, very minor quibbles. I think mechanically there are some complexities that I don't feel are necessary, but I mean, that's super minor. Of course, I would have liked to have seen some sort of an adventure just to give the game master an idea of how adventures are presented with Cypher System, because so many people out there do have to utilize printed material because they just don't have time to create their own adventures. So I would have liked to have seen that. But like I said, very, very minor critiques. This is a fantastic game. Is it going to be for everyone? No, it's not going to be for the monster bashers. But if you and your players enjoy narrative play and working together to create a really cool story, you must own this Cypher System rulebook. On a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Cypher System rulebook a 9.5 out of 10. It came oh so close to getting that 10 out of 10, but still a 9.5. This is fantastic. All right, that's it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central right here on YouTube. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. Until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.